My background is as a journalist. I got my BA in journalism from Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I also played Division I soccer there. In 2000, I got a job as a sports writer in Carson City, Nevada. Immediately moved to Lake Tahoe and then commuted to Carson City. Then started getting into magazines, powder skiing, and some other stuff. Recognition, just some of my outdoors and ski riding, Nevada Press Association, California Newspaper Publishers Association, just writing awards for that. Personal life, adventure is kind of an overused term, but I mean, big time into hiking, backpacking, mountaineering a lot, been on several expeditions to South America. Snowboarder, I grew up skiing. I grew up in Arizona. I wore jeans and I skied, and I came up to Purgatory and Telluride as a kid. And then I actually skied when I got to Lake Tahoe, and then got into snowboarding, had one good powder day on a snowboard, and said, I'm not going back. So I do still ski, but I want to call myself predominantly a snowboarder now. I'm just going to go through some of these images. This is obviously the Grand Canyon. It's where I developed my love for the outdoors, being from Arizona. These next few photographs are some of my favorite slides from the Cordillera Blanca in Peru, Cordillera Huayllash in Peru, and Patagonia area of southern Chile. So I'll just kind of go through them and talk to them. I mean, I don't know how I got to write a book about skiing and snowboarding, because really my love is mountaineering, but it just kind of happened that way. This shot here is Paine Grande in Patagonia. It might be hard to imagine, but actually some of that mountain is about the same elevation we're sitting at right now in Telluride. So obviously it gets quite dramatic as you get in the southern latitudes.
What's the base elevation?
Base elevation, so it's about 800-900 feet the summit, and we're sitting at about 5,000 feet right there in the national park. So about a 4,000 foot vertical relief. This peak here is Zhirishinka. That face right there is one of the hardest faces to climb in the world. I did not climb that. There's not many people in the world who can. But this is in the Cordillera Huayllash of Peru. Some of you guys might have heard of that book, Touching the Void, written by Joe Simpson. This is that range, the Cordillera Huayllash. I was just there in July. This next shot we'll go to actually shows the peak Sila Grande that the accident happened on. It's actually that peak to the left. On the back side of that is where the whole Joe Simpson tragedy happened. It was funny. I did an expedition to Aconcagua in 2002, and I was sitting in a mess tent, and there's some British guys smoking bad cigarettes, drinking box wine, and I don't know what's going on, and I get outside, and these Kiwis that we're climbing with say, oh my God, that's Simon Yates. And me and my friend were both, kind of ignorant Americans. We're like, who's Simon Yates? They're like, that's the guy that cut the rope. And actually Simon Yates, the guy that cut the rope that's famous in that movie, we were having dinner with him. So actually he's a really nice guy. This shot here is Lake Catacocha in the Cordillera Huayllash again. That's another shot of Sila Grande. What's actually funny about this, at the head of this lake, right here, there's a guy that sits right there and has his own little hut. And as we walked by, he sold us beer and a Snickers bar for $5, and it was the best $5 I ever spent. And what was funny is, he wanted to see pictures of America, and I showed him, and he wanted to do anything to live in America. And I said, do you know that your piece of property would probably go for like $50 million if it was in America? So you're doing all right. This shot here, this is in the Cordillera Blanca, Peru. I've climbed here 3 times. I put this in there specifically because that west face right there is about 55 to 60 degrees for 3,000 feet. And if anybody can name the name of this peak, I'll buy him a beer or a glass of wine. What's your? Starts with a T.
Teton.
No, the name is Toklarāhu, and the reason why, I'm all high and mighty because I got to climb this peak in 2005, and then this guy, Glenn Plake, he actually skied that face, and I thought I was all cool for climbing it, and then I found out he skis it, so I kind of dampened my parade a little bit. But I was lucky enough to have Glenn Plake write the foreword for my book. Obviously we know him as a big ski film star. He's getting older. Younger generation might not know him, but he really is the pioneer.
Oh yeah, I know.
He was basically the first non-Olympian, him and Scott Schmidt, to actually be like pro skiers, just for being awesome skiers. From South Lake Tahoe, where I'm from, he's usually very supportive of Lake Tahoe people. I did some stories on him over the years, first descents in the Himalaya and stuff, and I was pretty honored to have him help me out. Obviously, those are his big sponsors, and he's really difficult to get a hold of. He spends most of his winters in Chamonix, France, but he's finally found time to hit a deadline for a writing exercise. So, me personally, in the beginning, like I said, I started in Carson City, Nevada as a sports writer, which is like over that ridge of mountains. But I lived here in South Lake Tahoe. I just developed that love for skiing, snowboarding, climbing, the various things we live in these mountain towns for. I had the ideal shift, 3 to 11, swing shift, did everything before, went to work, all that. But the newspaper industry, I was still fairly young when I got the job, and everything's about going up to a bigger paper every 2 or 3 years. So after 3 years in Carson City, I moved to Portland, Oregon, where I get a job at a bigger paper. I feel like I'm on the right path. This is actually my apartment complex in downtown Portland. And I'm like, okay, everything's good, everything's fine, although, in my heart, I know it's not the right move because I want to be back in Lake Tahoe. But in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, I have to go make money. I can't goof off forever. And then this happens. Does anybody know who Teddy Bruschi is? Football player? Yeah. Well, so I'm on a mountain bike ride on the east side of Mount St. Helens with my buddy a few days after I get to Portland, right before my job starts, and I end up having a stroke a few days after my 26th birthday. What happened was I had what's called the patent foramen ovale, PFO for short. I don't want to. Basically between the left and right ventricles of the heart, there's a little hole in your heart that for about 70-80% of the population seals up naturally at birth or within 6 months after birth. But for myself and a lot of the people out there, it doesn't. So if it just so happens you have a blood clot going through your system and it gets squeezed through there and shot to your brain, you can have a stroke. So that's what happened to myself, Teddy Bruschi. And, so that's happening, and I'm like, oh man, this could be an omen. I really need to go hang out in Lake Tahoe. I mean, I'm 26 years old, I'm having a stroke. What the heck's going on? Maybe these ski bums back in Lake Tahoe have something the rest of the world could learn. So compounding that, I have a 7-mile commute. It takes me an hour and a half. This is actually somewhere probably in Asia, I think. But this is what Interstate 5 looks like from Portland to Vancouver some afternoons. And I'm sitting there in traffic for an hour and a half, and I had this stroke, and I'm like, I'm definitely going back to Tahoe. This is ridiculous. I mean, everybody in my office is wearing ties. They don't know why I snowboard. They think I'm just some lunatic. And I just said, life is getting too serious. I'm going back to Tahoe with the intention to write a book about ski bums. And the book started out as just vignettes about people who are living life to the fullest and their stories. And that was what the intention was. So here I go back to the beginning. This is Emerald Bay by South Lake Tahoe. And it's kind of funny, I just point this out, that I'm in Colorado promoting a book about In Search of Powder, and I just get a phone call from my buddies in Tahoe that's supposed to snow 3 to 6 feet this weekend. And I'm like, well, there's like an inch, I think, over Lizard Head when I drove over. But anyway, so I'm back to the beginning where the path is clear. I know I want to write a book. I know I want to snowboard, but I have no idea where I'm going to end up. And I get into these ski towns. I'm going to Jackson, Telluride, Mammoth, Crested Butte, and I'm meeting all these very interesting people who have lived in the towns maybe for 5 years and 30 years, and I'm getting a trend starting to develop here. And, I decide, well, I got to define, what is a ski bum? Because we all kind of have an idea, and based on all my interviews, my book's 70,000 words, but I actually have 500,000 words of notes just sitting there, So based on all my research, I got to come up with what is a ski bum? And I say, obviously, anyone who dedicates their lives to skiing and snowboarding during the winter. Next thing, not usually homeless, but can appear as such in the early stages. We all know the kind of look when we first go in there, and that's just another little element. Work is a necessary interruption as long as skiing isn't impeded by the act of working. So that swing shift job is very coveted, but we all know we have to work. We got to pay the bills at some point. We got rent, we have groceries, so that's how we view work. Cramped living conditions, menial jobs, and daily insolvency are some of the sacrifices, but powder days make this involuntary substandard living acceptable, even desirable. Now, it kind of goes beyond that a little bit more, because the ski bum is almost a little bit of an oxymoron in that most people who get exposed to skiing as kids, they're not really poor, destitute from third world Africa or rural Mississippi. Usually if you got exposed to skiing or snowboarding, you did family trips and stuff like that. So it's almost an oxymoron when we say ski bum, but when you do this, not only are you taking a voluntary substandard living, you're also much lower standard of living than someone with a similar educational background, financial background. So you have your bachelor's, your master's, all your other buddies are working in New York City or San Francisco making money, and you're doing this. So it adds kind of a different element to it. I'm just going to go through this is my home mountain at Kirkwood, outside Lake Tahoe. This guy, I don't know if he's doing 720 or what, but these next few shots are shot by a guy named Jonah Kessel, who's got great photography if you look him up online. And I'm just going to go through them. There's kind of fun ski, snowboard shots.
360.
I think it's a truck driver, too.
Yeah, it's a truck.
360 truck driver.
Yeah, he just kind of did a freeze frame. It's kind of crazy.
No.
So this is actually shot at Kingvale, which is a terrain park only by Donner Summit in California. Started by a bunch of pro snowboarders, actually. Just more shots here.
That's a mute ski. A mute.
This is a shot at Heavenly Mountain Resort, just a powder shot going through the trees. You know, this is obviously what, you know, why we live in these places, just for stuff like this. This guy's coming out of the pipe, and so forth. This guy's got his arms way too far out and does not have a good landing, I promise you that. That's a big cornice actually off Chair 4 at Kirkwood called the Wave, and this guy doesn't know what's about to hit him. Just pond skimming, going across the lake. I'm not sure exactly where this is at.
That looks fun.
Big crowd in the background. This probably also does not end very well for him. So not only do I have to come in like, what is the definition of ski bum? I say, what's happening to the American ski bum? Because as I got into these towns, although the book started out as a vignette, you know, about these cool ski bums, there was a trend starting to emerge that there's a whole disappearing ski bum. That people were very worried about their ski towns, the direction they were going, how expensive they were getting. So I came up, there was a whole list of things that people were worried about. And so as a journalist, when a trend starts to develop, you got to kind of go with it. And these next, I'm just going to go through them and I'll talk about kind of each and every one. I mean, a big one is these ski towns become resort towns, and second home ownership is huge. Most of these towns got anywhere from 50 to 80% of their homes are owned by second homes. Now, I have nothing against personally second homeowners. My parents just bought a place in Lake Tahoe as a second home. In and of themselves, they're great people, but when that happens, real estate prices go up. It's just a simple economics. You know, all these towns are built in very sensitive, environmentally conscious areas, so development is tightly regulated. If half your homes or more than half your homes are owned by people who don't live there, that's going to raise the cost of living for everybody else. And also, it kind of hollows out your town. You know, I talk about in the book, I described Halloween night in Lake Tahoe one night, and I was all stoked. I had like a big old jar of candy, thinking I was going to hand it out to kids, and only 2 kids showed up, you know, the whole night, and one of them was my next door neighbor. You know, so lots, just little things that you don't think about, like Halloween's almost for other towns when you have these empty towns. Now, when things get so expensive in town, and I'm sure Telluride can relate to this, resort towns become resort regions, where you start driving in from Rico or Ridgeway or Norwood, and then, I mean, the really obvious places are Aspen, the Roaring Fork Valley. Rifle's 70 miles away from downtown Aspen, and people commute 70 miles up to Aspen because the wages are so high and the cost of living so cheap. In Eagle County, Colorado, where Vail is, commuter traffic increased 700% during the 90s. People, you know, commute over mountain passes there. So yeah, these resort towns become resort regions, and what happens is now you're fighting for the soul of your town. I mean, yeah, the ski bums are cool, but towns got more important people to worry about: firefighters, plumbers, electricians. You know, when something happens, if someone's driving from 50 miles away, you got an issue. Workforce demographics. This has kind of emerged as well. J1, H-2B visas, the foreigners from Southern Hemisphere countries. You know, 20 years ago they made up just a few percentage, about 4% of ski resort employees. Now it's almost about 15 to 20%. And there's also an additional element. The Hispanic population now, they come in and do a lot of the jobs ski bums used to do. So now you have a combination of H-2B, J1 visas, and Hispanic employees taking up a lot of these jobs, almost to the point of 40% of the ski town employment. That goes for restaurants, everything else. The young generation, as we're sitting right here, they're not in college yet, but the young college graduate has extreme amounts of debt that was not heard of in the 60s and 70s. Average student loan debt's $40,000